How's it going? Welcome to this very impromptu draft review show in which we are going to talk about how to properly, in my opinion, scout NBA prospects and how to spot busts. If you even can do that, there's no exact science to this, but we're going to try our best to have better opinions, better discussions about the draft in years to come. And I think that this is going to be a great learning experience for a lot of people because a lot of people are very excited about the top of this draft. Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Victor Wembanyama, and there's no world in which any of these guys could possibly be anything other than all-stars, superstars, but how soon we forget. So if you're near around here, if you're catching us in Europe, I know we've recently gotten a lot of European subscribers due to all the Wembanyama and Nikola Jokic stuff. If you're near around here and you're from Europe, by all means, grab your coffee. If you're catching us because you're a night owl on Toronto time, by all means, grab your water and let's get to it. So, to have this discussion in a somewhat evolved sense, I would like to start with a bit of an admission. I'm wrong about the 2023 NBA draft. And so are you. I caught a clip from our old friend Sam Vecini, and I don't want to take a dig at Sam because I think I'm still a little bit bitter about him calling Scottie a no-level scorer during the draft cycle, just because of the ripple effects of what I felt that comment created for Scottie as a prospect and his uphill battle to prove people wrong. And I just thought that it was misinformation. But Sam is a very well-researched draft analyst. And today I caught the Athletic pod, the post-draft review pod, and he started talking about Jaime Jaquez, a player that I was very high on, a player that I had 16th on my big board. And I'm not under any illusions that Sam saw my big board or that he's even aware that I had one. But he said that he had him 23 and that if he could do it all over again, he would have him 16th or 17th, that he wishes he could have it, but he didn't know anyone who had Jaime higher than 23. Well, I did. But I also had Taylor Hendricks really low. I also had Grady Dick really low. And if I could do my draft board over again, I think I would change a few things. So obviously today, I not only want to talk about previous drafts and just kind of provide a little bit of data and analysis in terms of where the wins come from. I want to talk a little bit more about late first round picks and early second round picks and how much value they can provide for NBA teams looking to build some depth in the new CBA. I also want to talk about obviously the 2023 draft that just was and just what I look for in a draft prospect. So welcome all and let's get to this. So first, where do the wins come from? When you go through the draft buzz process, you'd likely walk away thinking that most of the wins and most of the all-stars and most of the MVPs are in the first 7, 8. There are random anecdotes about how there might be a sleeper like a Manu Ginobili or a Nikola Jokic sitting in any draft, but it's exceedingly rare. The general consensus and hypothesis with scouts that I talk to is usually there's about 2, 3, maximum 4 all-stars in the first 13 picks. After that, till about pick 22, there's about one more, and you'd be lucky from pick 23 all the way to the end of the second round, including the undrafted heap, where you might find one more. Now, in retrospect, when we discuss draft prospects, there's always an inclination that they would have become what they became wherever they went. And I think that this is disingenuous. And I also think that it ignores a very important component of the draft process, which is fit. And so one of the biggest reasons that pre-draft grades or even mock drafts and things of this nature or immediate gut reactions to a draft are so useless is because so much of what happens with a prospect's career comes down to where they end up. There are so many prospects that I was so unsure about until I saw where they went. And that's when I knew I had a better feeling about it. And so I spent most of the 2023 draft process hyping up Bilal Coulibaly. I started hyping him when he was mocked 35th, 37th. I started this with both him and Ryan Rupert, both French prospects, both that I had seen play a little bit, and I really liked both of them. And not in my wildest dreams, going into that hype process and hype cycle, did I ever assume that Bilal could end up the 7th pick in the NBA draft. I was very anxious to see where he went. I was hoping he would go high enough, but I was hoping that he wouldn't go too high. And why did I mean this? Well, because despite not knowing Bilal Coulibaly personally and despite not being a family member of his, I wanted him to do well. I thought it would be good for the NBA to have an athlete like this. I thought it would be good for French basketball that he would develop because France is on the precipice of something amazing with Victor Wembanyama. And generally speaking, higher draft picks tend to get more developmental run and more prioritization from their organization. If you want a good example of this, consider a player like Jalen Suggs, who was picked 5th overall by the Orlando Magic. And despite struggling immensely offensively and defensively at times and with health, he continues to be a part of the rotation. Had Jalen Suggs been a 2nd-round pick, it's very likely, given his performance so far, he'd probably be cut. So when Bilal Coulibaly ended up in Washington, I faced a bit of a conundrum. I thought about what I would give that draft grade, and suddenly I thought I might give that a D or a C, despite the fact that I really believe in Bilal Coulibaly as a prospect. And it's a similar thing with Grady Dick, someone that I had ranked a little bit lower than most people. But now when I see the fit with Toronto, I see the pipeline, I see the pathway to him getting minutes, I see how he'll work with Scottie and Pascal and Jakob, suddenly the grade gets a little bit better. It's funny how that works out. So I want to take a look first at 4 drafts that I randomly identified. I promise there's no reason for picking any of them except for one of them, which was particularly interesting. And I want to do a cross comparison between who the top 10 picks were and after some period of time, who the top 10 win share getters were. So let's start with the first chronologically. Let's start with the 1992 class. So this is going to be a bit of a history lesson for newer NBA fans as well. I'm sure most people here haven't heard of Todd Day or Adam Keefe. I'm sure some diehard fans will remember Walt Williams and Tom Gugliotta and LaVonzo Ellis. But I don't think that when I talk about LaVonzo Ellis to people, that they think that they immediately think, oh, he was a top 5 pick. I don't think that people remember Jim Jackson as a top 5 pick. You know, even diehards that I talk to, I'll be like, you remember Jim Jackson? And be like, oh yeah, he went in the lottery, right? They think he went like 10th, 11th, because that's sort of where the impact ended up, right? So this is the draft order for the 1992 class, which was a fairly strong class, which had 3 really great prospects at the top, which was Shaquille O'Neal, Alonzo Mourning, and Christian Laettner. And while Alonzo had a blossoming start to his career did get shortened a lot by injuries and due to his illness. But Shaquille O'Neal was by far and away the number 1 guy in this draft. And there was no doubt that whoever was getting that number 1 pick, which in this case was Orlando, was going to pick Shaq. And this has happened several times where a guy is clearly the best player. He's been the best player in that class for a long time. It happened with Shaq. It happened with Duncan. It happened with Yao. It happened with Victor Wembanyama. It happened with LeBron. But it doesn't happen as often as you would think. Very often, we find prospects at a different space. You know, very often guys who are ranked 7th, 8th, 10th the year prior go to college, they blossom, and then you start seeing them ranked higher up. A good case is someone like Imani Bates, right? So not to get too off track, and we'll definitely talk about that a little bit, but take a look at the win share winners. Obviously, Shaq, by leaps and bounds, is the win share winner in this class. But take a look at where some of that other value comes from. You got PJ Brown, the 29th pick from Louisiana Tech, a great pickup for the New Jersey Nets there. Then you have Alonzo Mourning. Then you have Mr. Championship himself, who went 11th overall to the Houston Rockets, won 2 championships with the Rockets, then won 2 championships. Hold on. Let me get this straight. He won 2 championships with the Rockets. Then he won 3 championships with the Lakers. and then he won 2 championships with the Spurs. I think it was 7, right? Then you have Christian Laettner, Clarence Weatherspoon, all lottery picks. And then you have Latrell Sprewell. Yes, the guy who choked his coach out. At the 24th pick, you have Doug Christie, a non-lottery pick. And right at the end, you have John Barry, another non-lottery pick, 21st overall. This seems to be a fairly heavy lottery draft, right? And as I tell you, as talent has expanded out into the world and as international players have become more and more of a thing in the NBA, you start to see that this trend of lottery picks dominating the win shares tends to go away just a little bit. So take a look here at, hang on one second. Take a look at 2014. So 2014, obviously, this was the Andrew Wiggins draft. Andrew Wiggins was hyped to hell, right? Everyone couldn't get enough of Andrew Wiggins mania, and everyone thought he was the next best thing. And he was Maple Jordan, right? People talked about him like he was going to be that good. And what ended up happening was Andrew Wiggins gets drafted to Cleveland, gets traded for Kevin Love, and then, it's kind of a wonky career, right? You think he's going to play with LeBron, and then he doesn't get to play with LeBron. And, he's in this weird developmental situation in Minnesota, maybe not the right market for him. And it just doesn't work out. And people clown it endlessly, and he's still a passable defender and he's putting up points and he's halfway efficient, but it just doesn't quite add up. And I mean, it almost felt like he needed last year's, finals run and just being one of the best players of the Warriors to actually redeem himself. And despite all the points that he's put up, you would be surprised to know that this was a pretty deep draft. And Andrew Wiggins, the number 1 overall pick, who some people thought deserved some finals MVP consideration last year, is not a top 10 win share guy in his own draft. Who are the top 10 win share guys in this draft? Well, surprise, at the top, Nikola Jokic, the 41st pick. Then you have Clint Capella, the 25th pick. Then Joel Embiid, who has often been injured and would probably be much higher than Clint Capella had he been healthy. He's only played 394 games. If you look at everyone else, he's played the fewest games out of all these guys. He's also played the fewest years. So he's number 3. Then you have Dwight Powell, the 45th pick, often not talked about enough as he has been extremely productive. Then you have an All-NBA guy in Julius Randle. Then you have Nikola Jokic's teammate at number 6, who was the number 4 pick. So far you have 3 lottery picks, 2 second-round picks, and a late 20s guy. Then you have Marcus Smart, another lottery pick who has sort of tailed off and just got traded. Then you have Jeremy Grant, another second-round pick. You have Kyle Anderson, the 30th pick. And then you have the tail end of the lottery, Zach LaVine, the 13th overall pick from that draft. So, I mean, in terms of order, it's pretty random, right? Like you can say the distribution is a little bit crazy. Then you have the 2017 draft, right? And then you have, like, you take a look at the order here and then take a look at the win shares. And it's pretty crazy, right? You don't have a lot of top 10 guys here. You have the 3rd pick, the 22nd pick, the 14th pick, the 13th pick, the 19th pick, the 7th pick, 5th pick, the 29th pick, the 51st pick. And then there's OG Anunoby, who, again, probably due to injury a little bit, isn't higher up on this list, but he's 10th, and he was the 23rd pick in the draft. And granted, it's kind of funny because OG Anunoby probably should have been a lottery pick in this draft, but he fell due to injury concerns, and he's kind of ended up exactly where he was supposed to be. I mean, he fell to the Raptors the same way Cam Whitmore fell to the Houston Rockets here, but he was pretty much consensus lottery pick until his injury in Indiana. So you have all of this happening, and you start to wonder, where do teams go wrong? Like, how do guys like Marvin Bagley and James Wiseman happen, right? Why am I so convinced that Brandon Miller is going to be a bust? Why am I so convinced that Scoot Henderson is better than Brandon Miller? How do I arrive at my random ass conclusions? I don't know. Is it perfect? Hell no, it's not perfect. But I'm trying to get to something that's a little bit more evolved than the traditional. First, let me criticize the traditional, because the traditional is worth exploring, because I've been watching it happen for 20 plus years, and it's pretty ridiculous. Here's how draft grades work. This is my mock draft. My mock draft, which I have formulated based on game tape that is publicly available. Usually it's not based on draft interviews and interview process. It's not based on a lot of medicals. It's not based on a lot of the interviews that teams do with players, former coaches, youth coaches, AAU coaches, their family, all of the research that it takes to properly put together what a draft prospect is. It does not take into account what the team is thinking that player's role is. I apologize for the very loud motorcycle going by. Jesus, at 3 a.m., it does not take into account all of those factors, and yet it does so very confidently. And they pound their chest and they say, "How could you? How could you? How could you pass on this guy? How could you pass on Cam Whitmore? How could you, how could you take Anthony Black this high?" And it's like, you don't know. And this team obviously did a lot of research. These are multi-billion-dollar organizations. They've obviously done some work. And so it's very easy to just say, well, the organization knows better than people on the internet doing YouTube research. So maybe we should all just shut up a little bit. But then why are organizations so consistently wrong? Why are organizations, even those that are very esteemed organizations? I mean, we're all used to clowning teams like the Detroit Pistons and the Charlotte Hornets for screwing up the draft. But how is it that the Golden State Warriors screwed up 2 top 7 draft picks? I mean, imagine how different the Golden State Warriors trajectory would be if James Wiseman was not James Wiseman. I mean, I went back and I looked at that draft. LaMelo Ball was widely mocked number 1. Half the mock drafts I looked at. So there was quite a bit of consensus that he was in play at number 2, and they decided to go for James Wiseman. How did they screw that up? What did they not see? What was missing? What about Jonathan Kuminga? I mean, people had him mocked higher than Scotty Barnes. Most mock drafts had him 4th, 5th. They had Scotty 6th, 7th. Can you imagine the Raptors right now if they were looking at this roster and the future was, do we or do we not build around Jonathan Kuminga? Can you even imagine what a screw up that would be? What if it was Jalen Suggs? What if the Raptors hadn't seen Jalen Suggs for what he would become and rather just focused on the March Madness highlights? So I want to take a moment now to talk about the 5 factors, the 5 factors of evaluating prospects. Now, I apologize, I'm going to have to read off a little bit here because I don't want to be overly long-winded, and I have a feeling that if I start talking about this free form and I don't do it scripted, then I'm probably going to go off on a tangent for 4 hours, and I don't have the time to do that, and I don't think you have the time to listen to it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pull myself off camera so that I can read this. So the following is how I evaluate a draft prospect. Hang on. So prospects can be very difficult to evaluate, and this is never going to get down to an exact science, but there are factors I like to look at. So the first 3 factors that I want to talk about are emotional, physical, and mental. So everything apart from skills, stats, advanced stats. All right. Some players are very advanced, either physically, mentally, or in terms of skill set for their age. A really good example is LaMelo Ball, Lonzo Ball. I mean, these are guys who've been training since they were 4 years old. So is it any surprise that they were ahead of kids when they were 14 or 15 years old? How do you compare a child who has had proper basketball training from age 4 to someone who literally didn't play organized basketball until they were 14, or in the case of someone like Pascal Siakam or Christian Koloko, until they were 16? Emotionally, I like to look at how reactive or unreactive a prospect is. Who is close to them? What drives them? Do they suffer from anxiety or are they calm? One of the things that Kobe Bryant really admired, this is a very ironic story. One of the things that Kobe Bryant really admired about Steph Curry early on in his career was how calm he was. He'd mentioned that a few times, like how, he just doesn't get nervous. He's not on the next play. He's not on the play behind. He's just really there. He's really focused. Well, I remember reflections of Jerry West talking about a young Kobe Bryant, and he said the exact same thing about Kobe. How did Jerry know about Kobe, and how did Kobe know about Steph? Emotionally, I think that I wonder if they're stoic. Are they too calm? Like, if a moment is like really big, are they just like way too calm? Like, do they not care? How do they react to adversity? Have they even faced adversity? Like a big injury? Did they come back from it? Did they rehab properly? Or did they maybe have some issue with grades? Or can I talk to a grade 6 teacher who maybe can talk about a time that they got into a fight at school and how they dealt with that kid? Things like this matter. One of the earliest stories of Scotty Barnes that I remember hearing about was how he got really upset with one of his assistant coaches, and I think that he even yelled in his direction at Florida State. And then he came back to him after, and he was like almost in tears, and he just like apologized, and he said like the moment got ahead of him or something. And I don't want to misquote the story, but the general point there was, how do you react after something goes wrong? What's your bounce back? And I think that that's important. Do they control anger well? Anger can get the best of us sometimes. I know this all too well. Speaking mentally, how focused are they? What are their habits? Habits are our lives, right? How do they prepare? Are they tardy? Are they late? What does their room look like? Talk to their parents. Did they keep their room spick and span, or was their room always scattered? Did they always lose things? Were they always late for things? I think this matters. Do they understand themselves as players? Like, do they have a real grasp? Like, when they say, this is my weakness, when I'm watching tape, is that actually their weakness, or are they completely delusional? When they say, this is the player that I watch, does that match up with the player that I think they should be watching? Like, can I see it? Is there congruency there? Do they have a charted plan on how to get from point A to point B? Are they already working with a trainer? Do they have a plan? Do they have a diet? Are they working on their diet? Do they even know about, their food intake and what they have to do? Sometimes athletes can bullshit you, but does it add up? Right? I think I'm assuming that the Pelicans asked Zion about his eating habits prior to drafting him. But I mean, how different would Zion's career be if he didn't have this yo-yo diet thing going on? How do you know, how's their impulse control? Just in general, like do they have addictions? Like, this is a really important thing. Like, can they keep themselves on track? Or are they the type of person who kind of just floats from place to place? Their friend says, "Hey, let's do this." And they're just like, "Okay, let me do that." And then they go from place. Do they have the ability to say no? I think that's important. How do they deal with escalation? Like, when things get bad, do they stop things down, or do they amp it up? I give them some complex word problems, some critical thinking problems. What else interests them beyond basketball? Are they into art? Are they into theater? Are they into cooking? Like, I think that's going to tell me a lot about this person. What's a good friend to them? Ask them to define that. Like, what is a good friend to you? Define your best friend, your best relationship. What is that about? Do their friends actually hold them accountable? Like, try to glean that from the interview process. These interview processes can get long, especially for high draft picks. Try to get a sense of, do their friends kind of just, are they hangers on, or are they like real friends? Do they have real people in their lives? Are their parents real people? Or are their parents just looking at them, unfortunately, the way a lot of parents look at their young athletes, like money, paydays? Are they seeking accountability? Like, are they seeking coaching? Like, do they want to be coached? Or do they want coddling? They want yes men. They want hype men, right? Physically. Now, this is important because physically we dismiss or elevate a lot of prospects. This guy has a 42-inch vert. This guy can do this. This guy has this wingspan. This guy can jump out of the gym. This guy did this sprint. Physically, this guy is 6'8". This guy is 6'4". So 6'8", that's better. I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone start out the conversation of Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson with, he's 6'9", he's 6'9", he's 6'9". I don't care if he's 6'9". Sam Bowie was taller than Michael Jordan. Okay? I don't care. Greg Oden's taller than, Kevin Durant. Andrea Bargnani was taller than Brandon Roy. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I promise you, it doesn't matter for shit. Okay? But sometimes it does, right? So physically, whatever they have, whatever they lack, how do they use it? What do they do to gain space and separation on the court? That's my biggest question offensively. Defensively, It's the exact opposite. How do you take space away? Okay. Is it vert? Is it height? Is it wingspan, quickness, agility, IQ? The longest, tallest player who always reacts 2 seconds late is really, really dominant in high school. He's really good in college. And in the NBA, he is a bust because it doesn't matter. Everyone's fast, everyone's tall, everyone's strong, everyone can dunk, everyone can jump. Okay. But now if you're a second behind, you're screwed. You're dead. Like you can't. So I have to test your reactivity. I have to test your coordination. I have to test how long it takes you to turn, right? These things matter. Now, skills. It's always tough. The Raptors have been banking for years that they can pick up prospects who lack skills. But some skills are harder to teach than others. So, but it can come with work. Look, DeMar DeRozan is a perfect example of this. Kawhi Leonard is a great example of this. Paul George is a great example of this. Skills came so far. Beyond this, I think you have to factor in organizational and cultural fit. This is so important. Look at what the Spurs are doing for Victor Wembanyama right now. Just look at it. There is a fraternity around to make sure that this kid has every ounce of support, from Tim Duncan to Sean Elliott to Manu Ginobili to Tony Parker. They're bringing in Evan Fournier. They're literally making this guy's pathway so easy. You know, early on in Andrea Bargnani's career, I saw the Raptors do a lot to make Andrea's entire pathway to the NBA so easy. The first year, he had Uros Slokar, Rashan Esterovic, his best friend on the team, Jorge Garbajosa. And you notice that in the first year, Andrea was a very different player. Suddenly you bulk him up, you take away his friends, you add in Marco Bellinelli. And to be honest, it just never felt the same. The vibes never felt the same. He just looked depressed all the time. And I knew a lot about what was going on with Andrea during the time. And it was a really sad story. And people just assumed that he didn't give a shit about basketball. But that's just not true. He loves basketball. He loved basketball. And yet I have to sit here and talk to Raptor fans every single time they bring up Andrea Bargnani and they say he just didn't care about basketball. And that's just the prevailing thought. There's no thought about, hey, you had this really quick shooting, versatile, switchy, long athlete, and you bulked him up because someone thought it'd be a good idea to turn him into Shaquille O'Neal because you had to guard centers and Chris Bosh wasn't willing to do it. It's just sometimes, you let the inmates run the nut house, and it really does backfire. Look at what Michael Jordan just did. There are rumors that LaMelo Ball's camp was not willing to sign an extension if they drafted Scoot Henderson. There's just rumors, but it checks out completely. Why would LaMelo Ball want to share the basketball with Scoot Henderson? Scoot Henderson is going to be a bigger star than him. He's going to be a better player than him. I guarantee it. I'm so positive. Okay, this is where we get carried away. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. I can't guarantee shit. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you don't know. But I have a very strong feeling that Scoot Henderson is going to be a better player than LaMelo Ball. So LaMelo Ball wanted Brandon Miller, and so Michael Jordan drafts Brandon Miller, and they sleep happy knowing that they drafted the best college player, and I'm going to sleep happy knowing that in 5 years, I think I'm going to be right. But why do I think that I'm right? Because when you factor in organizational and cultural fit, you also have to factor in leadership in your locker room. Look at what has happened to the Charlotte Hornets over the last few years. Look at their draft picks. Look at their lottery picks. How many players on that team have had trouble with the law? And ask yourself, what is going on? You want to blame the coaches? You changed coaches. You want to blame ownership? I don't think so. It's your leadership. It's your locker room. It's your culture. This is what Masai Ujiri so feverishly, fought against to build back the culture in Toronto. Because it's important. A culture of accountability, work hard, keep your head clean, stay out of trouble. This is culture. It's also leadership. But here's the thing. If I could take all 58 players that were drafted 2 nights ago and put them in the exact perfect situation for them, I am confident that 44 to 46 of them would absolutely make it in the NBA. They may not be stars, they may not be all stars, they may not be superstars, MVPs, champions, whatever. But I'm confident that I could turn them into 6-year pros. So why is it that 15 years from now, when we look at the 2023 NBA draft, we're going to see about 35 names that nobody can remember? Why is that? Because I think that a lot of people are going to end up in situations that don't suit them. I think a lot of people are going to end up in situations where the situation doesn't suit them and they don't suit the situation. There's got to be a fit. There's got to be a understanding, a deeper understanding of how this personality fits into your locker room. You know, when they say draft best player available, it means best player available for you. There is a fit component to it always. In terms of stats, because I know that people like to say stats. Well, this guy was, the leading, I don't know, 3-point shooter in college, or this guy had the highest box plus minus, this guy had the highest value replacement, or this guy had the most win shares in the toughest conference. Well, stats only go so far, because the guy that the Raptors just put on to a 2-way contract had better stats than Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley and Cade Cunningham, and he went undrafted. Why did he go undrafted? Apart from the fact that he's 5'7", partially because some of the things that he does just don't translate to the next level. And that's just the physics of the game. I like to look at efficiency. I like to look at positive impact metrics that trend up instead of flatline. So especially if a player is, been in the situation for 4 or 5 years, or 3-4 years, like a Duncan Robinson, you want to see like charted growth. With guys like Draymond Green, 4-year players, you want to see that they're getting better. Okay. I prefer really getting a fair understanding of strength of schedule. So for instance, a guy like Brandon Miller, if you isolate his stats, what did he do against good teams? What did he do against bad teams? I think you'll find out why I'm so bearish on him right then and there. Because I think that it says a lot about a prospect when you save all of your best games for all of the worst teams. Did you do it in a pro league? Did you do it in JUCO, Pac-12, Big 12? Did you get your numbers notably against bad competition, against bench lineups? I have to know. I have to know who you did what against. I can't base it all on, okay, well, this was the March Madness tournament, or this was the big head-to-head matchup. But it matters. It matters to me that Scoot Henderson had a really big performance against Victor Wembanyama. It matters because that shows me what he does when things get tight. Because a lot of people freeze up when the moment gets big. And I think that it means a lot when players don't do that. And then the magic bullet. How did what you did at the college level or overseas translate to what you'll likely do in the NBA? And what did you not get a chance to show at the previous level that you might be able to expand at the pro level? So maybe your school played a ton of zone and you're an incredible man defender. Maybe your school played zone precisely because you're not a good man defender and they wanted to hide you. But what if I don't have a scheme to hide you? What if I don't want to play zone? Well, now I'm in trouble. Maybe you played off the ball, but you have on-ball skills. Someone like Cason Wallace, someone like Kobe Buffkin, right? Maybe you sucked on ball, but you have elite off-ball skills. Someone like Keontae George, perhaps. Base minimum, view it per 100 possessions to adjust for pace and minutes, but also scale up for usage and minutes. So 13 points per game in 25 minutes off the bench for Santa Clara on low usage is going to be really, really different than 15 points per game in 30 minutes, 15 points per game in 30 minutes, starting for Kentucky on high usage. These are very different accomplishments. Finally, decide how it scales and if it scales. Some players will thrive on a bigger court, especially straight line drivers and big playmakers. Think Scotty Barnes and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Some guys thrive with more talented players around them. Some don't. Some have made a career in college out of getting to the rim, and there's no projectable advantages that allow them to do that in the next level. Maybe they don't have the burst, size, etc. This is the Marquise Noel problem. Some have made a career in college. This means sometimes tremendous talents will fall into undrafted heap, and some raw French teen averaging 5 points per game for the Mets 98 or 92 is going to go top 7. Bilal Coulibaly is nowhere near as good a player as Drew Timme or even Zach Edey. And I don't know if Zach Edey would have been drafted had he stayed in this draft. And I'm pretty sure Drew Timme went undrafted. I think that Zach Edey and Drew Timme would probably score 20 points per game in the league that Bilal Coulibaly put 5 points per game up. But that doesn't mean that they deserve to go ahead of him. So this is where you have to think of it like you're taking 100 lottery tickets over $200 on the very good assumption that the lottery tickets that you have a higher chance of coming out positive and hitting the jackpot than the lottery ticket someone else has. Also, a random note, and this is more about a part of the draft that I think is really undervalued, and I'd like to talk about it. Sorry, that was a little bit long-winded. I think that was about 10, 12 minutes of ranting, but I hope you got a lot from it. A lot of teams don't like late first-round picks. I've heard this a lot, and I love them. I love them a lot because, and I promise I'm not just being overly reactionary because Desmond Bane has just been so good and Pascal Siakam has been so good. But when you start thinking about the contract, Desmond Bane has given so much value. So much value. He makes $2.5 million a year. You lock him up for 4 years, then you have him on a restricted free agency. The amount of value you can extract by hitting on a late first round pick is immeasurable. And there are quite a few players taken at the end of the first round last year and this year that I think are very good. Last year it was guys taken in the 20s like Walker Kessler, David Roddy, Nikola Jovic, potentially. Guys like that. I like Peyton Watson, Christian Brown. The 20s were stacked last year for a supposedly weak draft. I think they were stacked again this year. So it makes me think, wow, to the teams that kind of gave those picks up, like Sacramento. I mean, I understand it. You want to move off a contract, you have bigger roster plans. But to get this pick right is such a huge thing because there are starters available. Christian Brown will potentially be the step-in starter for Michael Porter Jr. when they eventually trade him, when they realize that team is too expensive to keep together. You got him in the 20s. Walker Kessler is already a starter. You got him in the 20s. One day, potentially, when Jakob Poeltl moves on, the Toronto Raptors will start, potentially, Christian Koloko. He was the 33rd overall pick. OG Anunoby was a starter on day one. He was the 23rd pick. Pascal Siakam was a token starter and then full-time starter the next year, and he was the 27th pick. There are tons of examples of guys in the 20s, 30s. Andrew Nembhard's a great example last year. Jalen Williams, the other Jalen, last year for OKC. There's so many examples here. You don't always have to reach to the absolute extreme of, okay, well, we need to find the next Nikola Jokic. You can just find the next Draymond Green or the next Rudy Gobert. All examples of guys taken in the late 20s or early 30s. So now I want to give you a very rough, and I apologize, I'm a little bit sleepy, and I'm trying to get better about kissing my teeth into the mic and saying So I hope I'm getting better at it and that this is a more smooth listening experience for everyone who watches this right now. To the 62 of you live with us at 3 a.m., that's crazy and awesome. Thank you very much. Or to the people who watch it tomorrow. I hope it's a smooth listening experience. I'm trying to get better on the mic. So let's look at the draft. I apologize, it's going to be very, very small. It's more important to me that I can see it. Selfishly, I need to be able to see this, but I just want to go through with some thoughts about this draft. So at number one, obviously, Victor Wembanyama going number one is surprising to nobody. And I think the fit is incredible. The roster is incredible. The vibes are incredible. I've often been critical of San Antonio being a little bit overrated in terms of their development and in terms of their draft record, et cetera. But they obviously could not have screwed this up. And they didn't screw it up. It was great. The most endearing moment of the night for me, and I'm going to make it a subject of a reel that I post tomorrow, is Victor Wembanyama's reaction to Bilal Coulibaly going 7th. I don't know if you're a Raptor fan, you remember Scotty Barnes getting up and exclaiming super loud when he got picked 4th overall. He was so excited and he burst in this ball of joy. That was the exact same reaction that Victor Wembanyama had to Bilal Coulibaly going 7th. It was beautiful to watch. I don't like saying that I know or that I can't see this or this can't happen or whatever. And I want to touch wood because I really admire Victor Wembanyama a lot. I learn a lot. Every time I listen to him talk, I learn something new. And I really admire him for that. And I think he's a really cool person. And I think he comes from just this amazing, loving family. And he's the hope of French basketball. And he's such a huge thing that I really am just hoping right now for his health. And I'm hoping for his success and development in San Antonio. I have absolutely no complaints about that pick. My first complaint obviously starts at pick number 2 with Brandon Miller. I think this will be a mistake. I said it before the draft. I'll say it after the draft. I give this, honestly, I give it, I'm going to give it a D. I know this is going to potentially look so bad for me, years from now, if he does become an all-star or whatever. And I hope he does. I have nothing personal against him. I just cannot stand it. I can't stand the hype boys. People telling me that he's such a great player, and I don't think he is. I don't think there's a chance in hell he's going to be the second best player in this draft. I mean, just a couple of red flags, honestly, already. And these are such small things, but there's 100 red flags with him. But there's 2 that have erupted ever since he was drafted. Number 1, calling Paul George the greatest player of all time is ridiculous. Number 2, he was offered LeBron or Jordan, and he said Paul George. Bro, you just got drafted by the GOAT and you said Paul George. I don't know how Michael Jordan didn't hear that and just immediately call it off. Like, I would have just ran onto the stage, be like, nope, 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 we made a mistake. Sorry, can't. It's a small thing, and maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's everything. And then, in his introductory presser saying that he thinks that the Charlotte Hornets are going to go to the finals, I'm like, yo, honestly, chill. Like, you're not going to make the playoffs. It's very unlikely you make the play-in. You're going to go to the finals. We hope that the trophy is ours. If you told me Brandon Miller had never watched an NBA game in his life, I would believe you. It's crazy, honestly. Like, he's comped to Paul George, so he says Paul George is the GOAT. Like, it's so. I wouldn't have picked him. I had him 6th on my board. If I did the draft board again, I would feel comfortable putting him like closer to 10, 11, something like that. I don't get it. I don't. Scoot Henderson, great, great pick, terrible fit. I hope that doesn't impact his career. And he's one of those rare prospects where I don't think it really mattered too much where he went. He's going to be successful. So I'm not too worried that he's going to play with Dame, play without Dame, play half a season under controversy. I don't care. So far I give San Antonio an A+. I give the Charlotte Hornets a D, and I give the Portland Trailblazers an A+. There's absolutely no reason. If they had even thought about going Amen Thompson, I dropped this grade. Number 4, Amen Thompson to the Houston Rockets. Well, I'm not going to dock a team for picking my 3rd-rated prospect 4th overall. I think it's a good deal. I worry about the fit. I would have worried about the fit more if Ime Udoka was not there. But Ime is there, and he's a great coach, and he's a tough-minded coach, and I think he'd be really good for Amen. So I think they get an A for that one. Ausar Thompson going number 5. I think they'll regret that one. I think there were better players on the board, but it's not a terrible pick, and so I'm going to give it a B. Anthony Black, number 6. Somebody saying they got Elfrid Payton vibes has not watched Anthony Black play basketball. I think he's a much better athlete than people give him credit for. And he is another example of a guy who I'm virtually certain in almost any situation he would have thrived. With a young core in Orlando, I think he'll be great. I give that an A. Bilal Coulibaly at 7 to the Washington Wizards. I had Bilal 10th on my big board. I love Bilal. I have him as the 3rd highest upside prospect in this draft. That being said, he also has one of the lowest floors in this draft, and there's so much that can go wrong for him in Washington. Playing with players like Jordan Poole is not going to be good for any young player's health. This might be hot take territory, but I'm going to give this a C. I would have given this an A+ or an A if he had ended up in Indiana. I think Tyrese is the right point guard to set up someone like that. I think, the coaching system is right. I know that they're restructuring things and reshuffling things in Washington. If they picked him this high, hopefully they have a really good plan for him. I should probably just grade this a wait and see, but I'm willing to just say if there was if there was any team in the entire first round that I did not want to see Bilal on, it was Detroit and Washington, and he goes to Washington. So I don't love this for them at all. I mean, literally, the entire lottery is full of good teams with like really solid either coaches. Obviously, Bilal, I would have cringed if he'd gone to Charlotte as well. But I just think a player like this needs it needs a different city. He needs like so much support. English is really difficult for him. How is he going to get along with, Jordan Poole? I don't know. There's something there that just strikes me as this is going to be a failure, and people are going to say, see, the hype wasn't real, and we're never going to be able to see what he could have become, because I really believe had he dropped to Toronto at 13, or had he even gone to Dallas, or if he'd gone to Orlando or OKC or Utah or literally anywhere else almost than Washington, I think he would have been a really successful player, unfortunately. Jarace Walker, solid B, nothing to complain about here, right around where I had him on my big board. In fact, I think he's exactly where I had him on my big board. I'm perfectly fine with this. Taylor Hendricks. I was not as high on Taylor, and then I found out a lot more about him after the draft, things that I might have missed about him. And generally speaking, I tend to believe that, players of his psychological profile may not make it in the NBA, but I think he's ended up in a really good situation. Had I known prior to that he was going to go to Utah, I think I would have mocked him a little bit higher, or graded him a little bit higher on my board, because I just think that this is a really good situation for him to grow and develop under some really good players and a really great coach in Will Hardy. So I'm going to give that a B. I'm cautiously optimistic, even though it's 8 picks or 9 picks higher than I would have had him on my big board, and I was very low on him. I think of all the teams he could have gone to, this is one of the ones where he could actually be successful there. Let me drop that to a B minus. Now I'm going to give it a C plus. I could be wrong. He could end up being something really great. People have compared him to Pascal Siakam. Some people have said Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't see that level of upside in him. Bit of a late bloomer. Came on a little bit late. Fun fact, fun anecdote. He was a teammate of Scotty's in high school. He was much younger than Scotty, and maybe seems like a really good kid. Seems like a really good guy in general. I think he's going to really fit in Utah, but I don't see a star there. Oklahoma City, Cason Wallace. I don't know how this fits, and I know that we're not supposed to grade on fit, but I'm a really big Cason Wallace fan, and Sam Presti obviously knows what he's doing in the draft. He's been right about so many players. And so, look, I had Cason around 10, 11 on my board, and he goes 10, and I like it. I'm going to give it a B minus. No, let's give it a B. I'll give it a B because I wonder if there's a better player left on the board that they could have used, but I think he'll be really good for them. I think he's got a lot of, I wonder about like where he's supposed to play. Like they've got Josh Giddey, they've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I mean, good for them for still taking him. But I wonder if he'll get the reps and the minutes he needs to be successful, or if he'll be around the players that allow him to be successful. In a lot of ways, he complements Josh Giddey really well because he compensates for so much of his defensive woes. But nevertheless, Jett Howard, a little bit higher than I had him. I think I had him 16th, 17th, or 18th on my board. I was higher on him than most. I think he's a really good pick here. Ironically, also a teammate of Taylor Hendricks in high school, also a teammate of Scotty Barnes in high school. I like it. I'm not entirely sure about 11th overall. I think they'll regret not picking somebody else here, but I'll give this a B minus. I don't think it's a great pick. I don't think it's a bad pick. I just think it's an interesting pick. It feels like, okay, we drafted another non-shooter. Let's go with one of the best shooters. And to everyone saying, and we'll talk about it with the Grady Dick stuff, but a lot of people think Jett Howard is the best shooter in this draft. The whole best shooter in this draft tag has been ascribed to quite a few prospects. For Jordan Hawkins, I've skipped 2. Derek Lively at 12. I think this is a great draft, man. Like the Dallas Mavericks absolutely killed this draft, and I really like this pick for them. I had him really high on my board. I think analytically, he's going to beast. I think it's a great pairing with Luka. He's the type of rim rolling big that you really want to see with him. Covers up so much defensively. I think the Dallas Mavericks are probably, if not the biggest winner of the draft, then by far one of the top 2 to 3 winners of this draft. Moving on to Toronto, Grady Dick. I'm going to give this a B minus. Again, I'm on record saying that I support Grady, and I think that he's a lot better than I realized initially. He's a bit bouncier than I realized. He's got a unique fluidity about it. I showed my girlfriend some of his TikTok videos, and she's like, for a really big guy, he really knows how to move. And I think that's something that a lot of people are going to realize about him is that looks can be deceptive, and that he can move a lot better, at least up and down. Um, horizontally, he's got a little bit more burst than people realize. He's a little bit longer than maybe his measurements suggest, right? There's been some misinformation out there that he's got a 7-foot wingspan. That's not true. He measured in with a 6'8", 3/4 wingspan, 6'6", I believe 3/4 without shoes, or 6'6.5" without shoes. So he's basically 6'8" with a 6'9" wingspan, which is really good size for a small forward or a shooting guard. May not always scale up to being a power forward or something like that. So obviously, some of the draft prospects in Raptors history that the Raptors have picked up, like Pascal Siakam, who was 6'8" with a 7'4" wingspan, Scotty Barnes, 6'7" with a 7'3.5", 7'4" wingspan, OG Anunoby, 6'6.5" with a what was it, 7'2" wingspan. Christian Coloco, I think it was 7 feet with a 7'6" wingspan, or 7'4" wingspan. I mean, these are elite freaks, and the Raptors have so many of them, so maybe they can compensate for a little bit of few of Grady's defensive weaknesses. I was pretty firm that I really wanted Jordan Hawkins here. I think down the line we may look back on this and say they both ended up really good. I don't know who's going to be better. If I had to make this pick right now with everything that I know, I'd be torn, but I'd probably pick Jordan Hawkins or Kobe Buffkin. But I'm comfortable with Grady Dick. I know that sounds like a really controversial thing for a lot of people to understand. A lot of people have taken, my draft reaction and said, oh my God, he hates Grady Dick. I don't hate Grady Dick at all. I don't hate him at all. I think he's great. Like, I think I love the vibe. I love the off-court stuff. I love, some of his charisma. And, there's so much psychology that goes into drafting, right? Like it's been debunked how severely this impacts people. But you look at youngest siblings, just overall, you look at youngest siblings in general, and you see certain traits in them, and they tend to be a little bit more fearless, outgoing. These are all great qualities, by the way, for NBA prospects. So, you know, um, a lot of the stuff that swung me on Jet Howard is also true for Grady Dick, and you know, I'm willing to see it out. But yeah, I give it a B minus with a cautionary, hopeful, that it'll be an A plus, and that I look very foolish as a Raptor fan. I want to be wrong so badly about this, but I'm not sure that I am. New Orleans, with their sole pick in the draft, pick Jordan Hawkins. I'm going to give this an A. Actually, I'm going to give this an A plus. I love Jordan Hawkins. I love him so much, and I'm really happy that he went to New Orleans. I found him to be one of the. I think when it's all said and done, we'll look back on this and we'll say he was one of the top 5 or 6 players in this draft. I don't know who's going to be better than him. I don't know who's going to be worse than him, but I just feel like the way that he approaches the game, his mentality for the game, his bloodlines, his just general work ethic, his shooting stroke, his movement, his athleticism. He's not a super athlete, but he's a good athlete. There's some burst to his game. I see all sorts of Desmond Bain potential, all sorts of playmaking potential. He's super smart. I just love the pick. And, time and time again, I just find myself loving everything that the Pelicans have been doing other than keeping Zion Williamson. So the trade for Brandon Ingram, great. Even Lonzo Ball before he got injured. I was a big buyer on Lonzo. I like Lonzo more than LaMelo. I've always liked Lonzo more than LaMelo. And prior to his injury, I thought he was a better player. Picking Dyson Daniels, picking Trey Murphy III. I mean, they have assembled such a beautiful core there. And apart from Jackson Hayes, I mean, they've hit on so many picks, right? Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, like they're just so good at drafting. And it makes me really confident that David Griffin saw him as the best player available. Kobe Buffkin at 15, I give this A minus, A minus, something like that. Honestly, really good player. I worry about the fit. I worry about, his role on that team, but I'm a big believer in Kobe Buffkin, and I have a feeling that the Raptors had a promise to him and broke it at 13 because they didn't think he would be there. And, he didn't work out for the Atlanta Hawks. They picked him anyway. He mentioned it in his post-draft interview that he didn't work out for them, but I'm going to give this an A minus. I am cautiously curious to see how it'll work out, but I don't love the fit for him. I would have loved to see him fall to the next pick. If I could do anything in this draft other than swap the Raptors pick for, Jordan Hawkins for Grady Dick, I would swap Kobe Buffkin and Keontae George. Like, their fits would be so great. I think Keontae George would just be great in Atlanta for him, because I'm not really a buyer in him as a prospect at all. And I just think that Kobe Buffkin would have absolutely soared in Utah. And it just sucks that, this is how the draft works out sometimes. Keontae George at 16, it's really tempting to just agree with everything Danny Ainge does in the draft. I did not have Keontae in my top 20. And some people might be surprised to realize I didn't have Keontae in my top 23. I had him as a 24th rated prospect in this draft. And, it's kind of funny. Like, 3 prospects that I was really sour on are the 3 guys that Danny Ainge picks. And it makes me think to myself, oh my God, Rob, you're an idiot. Like, these 3 guys, like, they all have the exact same thing in common. Well, at least 2 of them do. And I wonder if I'm wrong. And everything hits for Keontae, and he becomes this mega bucket getter off the bench or microwave scorer. I didn't love his maturity. I don't like his shot selection. I don't buy his athleticism or his ability to finish at the rim. He is strong. He is physical. He is fearless, but he's not a playmaker. I wonder about his size defensively at this 2 guard. And I don't think that Danny Ainge walks on water or turns water into wine. So I'm not going to assume that he's God. So I'm going to feel free to disagree with Danny Ainge here, and I'm going to give this a C. I'm not really sure who I would have taken over him in this case. I probably would have taken Jaime Jaquez. I probably would have been comfortable with Brandon Podziemski. I might have taken a swing at Cam Whitmore. We'll get into that. I think there were some better players here, but I can understand the pick. 17, I don't get this pick at all. I think Jalen Hood-Schifino was just outside my top 20. I think he was 22nd on my board. I like him. I don't like the fit here. I don't necessarily see the pathway forward unless they're thinking that he's going to replace Austin Reeves. It's an interesting pick. I don't have anything bad or good to say about it necessarily, but I wonder about the athleticism. He's obviously a big guard, but I don't know if he's a pure point guard. I worry about that sometimes. People have just written that off like he's definitely a pure point guard, and there were some question marks with that too. So combo guard, 6'4" ish, not some elite burst, not elite length. So, there's a lot of players where athleticism was a bit of a question mark. Maybe size was a bit of a question mark. There was Jordan Hawkins, there was Kobe Buffkin, there was Jalen Hood-Schifino, Keontae George, right? Cason Wallace. I mean, there's a fair case to be made that all of these guys, if they don't turn into point guards, are going to be really undersized shooting guards. So you're hoping for a lot of the on-ball stuff to develop. And obviously with Cason, you expect that it will be a more smooth transition. And with Kobe, you can at least see it. With Keontae and Jalen Hood-Schifino, I wonder if they'll have as easy a time overcoming some of their deficiencies. Miami Heat. So what do I give Jalen Hood-Schifino? I'll give it a C+. I think it's a decent pick. Honestly, I'm gonna give it a B-. I like the pick enough to give it a B-. I'm not sure I can reconcile or wrap my head around the fact that he's going to be on the same team with LeBron. Shooting is still a question mark. I don't know. You're trying to maximize a timeline here. You have a golden asset like the 17th overall pick. I don't know. You're on a different timeline, man. You're trying to win a championship next year. I'm assuming you're still trying to do that. I don't know if Jalen Hood-Schifino can play for you next year. So that is my question. Now, here's a player who could have played for you next year in Jaime Jaquez. I think too many people have incorrectly assumed that the most Jaime can ever be is a role player. I think he can be a little bit more than a role player. I think he'd be a starter. I think he can be a long-term starter. He can be a 12-year pro. I think this is a guy who just wins basketball games. And for that, I'm going to give the Heat an A+. Brandon Podziemski for the Golden State Warriors. And, we'll call this how Golden State got its groove back, because I really like their draft night. And this is a good pick. I'm going to give it an A-. I really like his analytics. I don't love his size. 6'5" is disingenuous and very generous, actually. He measured shorter, and he doesn't have elite wingspan. Not a super athlete, but really crafty, good shooter. I think he'll fit with the way they play basketball. Now, here is the biggest dropper of the draft, Cam Whitmore. And I had him lower than anyone I can imagine. I think he had him at 14th. And I did that on purpose. I felt like he was going to drop. I didn't like him throughout this entire process. I've never had a good thing to say about Cam Whitmore. And this is nothing personal against him. And I don't want to make it personal against prospects. I'm just telling you, like, I didn't get it. Like, I didn't see what the upside was. Like, his measurements aren't great. His athleticism is good, but it's like it's a different type of athleticism. It's like got a lot of Joey Graham vibes to him, not the greatest basketball IQ. So, okay, right? Good shooter, athletic, physically developed, injury issues, commitment issues, work ethic issues, character issues, was late to think. Okay, I'm done. So, look, I understand the Houston Rockets will always, 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 and I swear to God, always go back and find one time where they did not pick the highest guy on the mock draft. They are so basic with their draft strategy. And sometimes it really works, like Alperen Şengün. It really worked. Congratulations. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it backfires. And I think they've had a pretty disastrous draft record. I mean, okay, disastrous is overstating it. They haven't had a disastrous draft record, but I don't think Jalen Green has worked out for you. And I just, look, losing cultures are difficult and it's difficult to overcome. I happen to have inside information that there were a lot of top prospects in 2021 who refused to work out for the Rockets that year, partially because of everything that's going on with the organization, but just because it's such a trash organization at the time and they didn't want to go and lose. And so you end up attracting more of what you put out, right? If you're the Charlotte Hornets and LaMelo Ball is your fearless leader, well, then you're going to attract Brandon Miller. That's just the people that are going to be attracted to your organization. Those are the people that are going to really dazzle you because those are the people who fit. When you have the wrong starting pieces, and you have the wrong foundation, you end up attracting a lot of the wrong clutter. So I'm not really sure that Cam Whitmore is going to be a great player. I am sure, however, that if I had the 20th pick, I would have picked him, no questions asked, regardless of how I feel about him, because there's just so much upside and so much value here. But every single year, I mean, you ask yourself, if someone saw Marvin Bagley when Marvin Bagley, went second, the year that he went second, if he had slipped to eighth, everything that passed on him would have gotten a D grade. How could you pass on him? How could you pass on him? But if we did a redraft of the 2018 was the 2018 draft, I think I don't think Marvin Bagley would go in the lottery. So all of the teams that would have passed on him would have been correct. So it's really difficult, when Mike Dunleavy was asked for the Golden State Warriors, why did you pass on Cam Whitmore? He said, we picked the highest guy on our board. And I thought that was very interesting. That means Brandon Pajinski was higher on his board than a guy that most people had mocked top 5. And by the way, oh my God, I hate that I get so salty when it comes to Sam Vecini, but he had Leonard Miller as a top 13 pick, and he went all the way at 33. Now, I'm not even going to pretend that I had my 13 right because my 13th pick went 43rd. And so it's funny that I would even joke about that. But the way that we talk about these things is so funny to me because like I obviously believe in Rayon Repair a lot. Like I do. I think he's gonna be really, really good. And for the 43rd pick, obviously the Portland Trailblazers are the biggest winners in the draft for me. But I knew he was mocked in the second round for a lot of people. I felt like I was being bold and controversial by putting him 13th because I thought that's where he, probably should go based on his tools. And maybe I'm really wrong about that. But with Leonard Miller, there were some serious issues. Like there was feel issues. There were so many issues. And to have him 13th overall, it just really makes me wonder your credibility as a draft analyst. It really does. Because that just to me is like it's a fundamental misunderstanding of basketball. And look, I don't think there's a chance in hell that Leonard Miller ends up being a 13th best player in this draft. Like, I don't think there's a chance. There's like a 1% chance, less than a 1% chance, especially now that he's in Minnesota. Maybe he pops. Shit, he wouldn't be the first player picked in the late 30s or early 30s that pops. Maybe he's this year's Draymond Green. I highly doubt it. It matters so much to me that there's a feel element to players, and he just didn't have it. To me, he didn't have it. Anyways, Cam Whitmore, A. You can't give it less than an A, unfortunately. The upside is too high, but I'm not busting over it. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not like, oh my God, great. Like, In every case, Houston picked the best player available. I also feel much more confident, just like with Amen Thompson, that he's going to have Ime Udoka as his head coach. I also want to say that I think the Houston Rockets are probably the most athletic team in the league. Yeah, I think that's without controversy. Speaking of athletes, Dariq Whitehead goes 21st to the Brooklyn Nets, and I think that's higher than most people would have had him. I had him, if I'm not mistaken, 20th on my big board. I really like him, so I'm really happy that he went that high. He was the number one rated prospect in this class for a little while there prior to the injuries. If he can stay healthy, I think the Brooklyn Nets have yet another good player. And, with the addition of Cam Johnson and, Mikal Bridges and all of the players that they're bringing into this, I just really like what they're doing in Brooklyn suddenly. And they really get it. Like, they get what they're doing with their roster building. I mean, they screwed up on Ben Simmons, fine. They really screwed up on that. But everyone else they brought in just checks the boxes basketball wise. Speaking of checking the boxes basketball wise, I think Noah Clowney is a really interesting upside pick here. One of the youngest players in the draft. I don't know. I think this could be a boom or bust type of situation. You usually don't get this type of upside at the 22nd pick, so I like it. Portland Trailblazers, balancing a little bit of win now, perhaps, with Chris Murray. I think he's a rotation player in the NBA, like a late rotation player, or max, a 10th guy on a roster right now. And I think that adds some wing depth. Defense, not exactly the strongest, but good enough. I think this is solid value for a 23rd overall pick. So let's give Noah Clowney, let's give Dariq Whitehead an A. Let's give Noah Clowney a B minus, and let's give Chris Murray a B minus as well. There's obviously a player I would have picked over him, but let's continue. Olivier Maxence Prosper, a Canadian guy from Montreal. Congratulations, Canada. You get two players that go late in this draft. Felt he was a little bit raw at Marquette. I get all the athletic tools and upside and the feel and look and all that stuff. Again, just like I said with just like I said with Noah Clowney, and perhaps Dariq Whitehead as well. It's very rare to get this level of upside in the 20s. I mean, in an ideal world, he develops differently, and he's probably a lottery pick with his physical gifts. So I think this is a solid B minus. Marcus Sasser, embarrassed to say, I don't know a lot about Marcus Sasser, so I'm just going to leave that as incomplete. I think I've mentioned before that I did not scout the second round very extensively, so my grades are going to be somewhat limited to the prospects that I did. So I'm going to leave that incomplete. Ben Shepherd, I like it. I didn't scout him as well as I would like to. I do not feel comfortable grading that pick. I don't feel as comfortable on him as a prospect or know as much about him as a prospect. Nick Smith is a player that I do know a lot about, and I believe he said no HOMO on draft night. And if I recall correctly, Nikola Jokic got fined $25,000 for saying that. So, I mean, he can expect before his first contract is even signed that he's going to have a fine from the NBA for saying that. A lot of upside again. He was mocked third overall, and everyone's used that to give them an A plus for it. I was very low on him. I had him outside my top 20. I don't think I saw another board where he was outside the top 20, if I'm right, but I had him right around here. It's an intriguing pick. He's a big playmaker if he's healthy. If the health was really a concern last year, but I wonder about maturity. I wonder about athleticism at this level. I wonder if he's a pure point guard. He's really not. So he's more of a shooting guard. He does have the size and the wingspan and all that stuff, but he's really light. So it'll really depend on maturity with him for sure. Now, a player that I wasn't super high on the entire way through, but even I am a little bit shocked that he fell this far. It's Bryce Sensabaugh. I widely expected him to go anywhere from the extreme, maybe 18th, I thought was his range. I thought 18 to 22. Him falling all the way to 28 is a little bit surprising. Makes me have questions about how he tested, and also makes me question about his injuries. If he's healthy, He is an interesting bucket getter. I don't know if he'll be able to do a lot of the isolation stuff. I do think he's a little bit undersized, but he has some wingspan to make up for it. He really does have an interesting game. It's like very quirky, and he's a really good shooter. And honestly, people just overlook him as the best shooter in this draft, but I think he has a really solid case for it as well. So, yeah, I mean, again, this is Trader Danny like working his magic in the draft. He really doesn't miss, and it's hard to argue that there were two better players left on the board than Bryce Sensabaugh. Again, not the upside that you usually get at 28. You usually get a lot of bigs or like raw players or whatever. I don't know if he's a bit of a tweener. I wonder how you cover from on defense, but I give this a B plus. I give it a B plus because in no world am I willing to give Bryce Sensabaugh an A grade at all. Julian Strawther, a player that I have been mocking to the Toronto Raptors in NBA 2K for like 3 years now. Every year I think he's going to be in the draft, and he's not. I really like him. I think apart from Jalen Suggs, Gonzaga has produced some interesting players over the last few years. He's been a really big part of those teams. I've always liked him. I think he's a really good role player, and I wonder if Denver is just, I mean, I think another really good case is Denver won this draft. I mean, people don't want to say this because they had such late picks and none of these players are super hyped. But Julian Strawther and Jalen Pickett, like to me, it's hard to imagine a team getting more value from 29 and 32 than those two guys. They were very much higher on my board. They were, well, not very much higher. They were around this area, but it's mainly due to what you can consider limited upside. But Jalen Pickett, one of the best players in college basketball. I think also Hunter Tyson. I don't know as much about him, but from what I can understand, I like that pick as well. The other winner of this draft is it says that Trace Jackson Davis went to the Chicago Bulls, but I believe that pick was traded. I had him much higher. When I was doing my evaluation, I deeply contemplated putting Trace Jackson Davis as early as 30 on my board. I like his analytics a lot, and I really like his confidence after he fell so far in this draft that he said these teams are going to regret it. They are going to regret it. Another player that fell really far and fell right to another team that does not screw up in the draft and does not fuck around in the draft is Gigi Jackson going to Memphis. I mean, honestly, all the athletic tools, really rare to see a player with this upside in the second round, but there you go. The Memphis Grizzlies get another good one. They got one of my favorite players last year in the undrafted heap, and in Kenny Lofton Jr., and they get Gigi Jackson this year, and this is a great pick. And Portland, of course, and San Antonio right in the middle, just nailing this draft as they always do. Portland getting Rayon Rupert. Again, Rupert, Scoot Henderson, and last year they got Shaden Sharp. Like, my God, the Portland Trailblazers are doing a great job. And San Antonio getting City Sissoko from the G League Ignite. I think that's a really good pick for them as well. So apart from that, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, there are prospects that I'm familiar with, but I don't have very strong takes on them. Jalen Clark, Imani Bates, obviously. I don't know. I think Imani Bates is the reason we're having this discussion, really. Maxwell Lewis is another really interesting player for the Lakers. I've really liked how the Lakers have drafted the last few years. So, yeah. And I mean, look, Minnesota, Leonard Miller at 33, I would argue that's solid value there for him. Again, if I was any team in the second round, I'm calling Ryan Rupert's number. I'm not sure if it's Rayon Rupert or Ryan Rupert. I've heard it said both ways. I believe it's Ryan Rupert. So Ryan Rupert. I would have loved to see the situation where Ryan Rupert goes to San Antonio and actually gets to play with Victor Wembanyama. They're friends. It would have been great. I wonder if the Spurs would have done it, but it doesn't work out that way, unfortunately, for Wemby and Ryan Rupert. But nevertheless, I think he will be really good. And look, if you want defense around Dame, I think you might have it. I think, look back in 5-6 years, I would not be surprised if number one, Ryan Rupert is still in the league, and would not be surprised if he's one of those. How did that guy fall with that wingspan and that athleticism? Or, he's back in Europe in 2 years and I look like an idiot for having him so high on my board, but I really liked him. Anyways, this has been really long winded and hopefully insightful, I hope, with my face not on the screen. But I did want to, naturally, I wanted to have this discussion clearly at 4 a.m. And yeah, okay, now let's respond to some comments. There are 62 comments, and let's. Okay, let's start in the beginning. Rob blamed the Wiseman draft on the COVID crisis. It was hard to scout players that year. That's fair. He played a few games at Memphis, but you had him in. You could have talked to him. You could have gotten a feel for him. You could have done some athletic testing on him. I think there were a lot of red flags there. And yeah, Kuminga's shown flashes. I think he's got potential to start on an NBA team. Sure. But, we're not going to ignore the fact that they took him over Franz Wagner, and they could have used Franz Wagner. I think Franz Wagner even fit better on their roster. So regardless, when you pick a player who picks the exact same position and he's significantly worse than the player picked right behind you and it's the same position, I think it's hard to justify that pick without, I don't think his basketball IQ is necessarily so low, but I see why you would say that. Cool. How everybody's habits affect career goal. Oh, okay. I was an unruly student, but look at how well I turned out. Elbow cough. That's funny. Most organizations think they can coach lifestyles, they can draft on physical gifts. Nothing wrong with that, though. There's a lot wrong with that because I think that psychology would show you that most people have a lot of downloaded thought patterns, programming, and subconscious thoughts about themselves, about the world, about other people. So it's really difficult for me to imagine, like, let's say I'm a NBA GM and I meet a prospect that's very mistrusting or has trouble with authority or sees themselves as an outsider or maybe has really poor impulse control or has a bit of an aversion to risk, gets really anxious when risky situations come up. Like if I put them on the spot, like they panic. Like I think these are things that are really hard to wipe out, right? Like, and I think there's so much research to be done on neuroscience of performance, but I think as the research becomes clearer, the draft process will become more sophisticated. You still draft Zion and Odin. Actually, you don't, and I can tell you quite firmly. I mean, it's one thing to say that, oh wow, like I would have picked Kevin Durant. I actually have a video that I released 15 years ago, or whenever the draft was, 16 years ago, on YouTube. It's still there. It's called Kevin Durant, the number 23. Go watch it, in which I declare at that time that it was the wrong pick and that they will look back and regret it, and that Kevin Durant will be the next Michael Jordan. And that hasn't exactly panned out, but I don't know, he's as close as anyone probably thought he would ever get, right? Bargnani was a mama's boy and lazy. I have no sympathy for him. He was actually not lazy. He's a little bit of a mama's boy. But you know what? Grady Dick is a mama's boy, and Scotty's a mama's boy too. Do you hate them too? I like the concept of ranking players by win shares. Yeah, it's a lot. I think it's better than ranking players by points per game. Okay. I wonder why you think that. Can't wait for Summer League. Yeah, me too. I honestly, you know what I can't wait for? I can't wait for Scoot Henderson to put up like 50 points on Brandon Miller. Like I think he's gonna. Whoever made that pick should be fired. I'm so firm on it. I don't know. I watched this video. It was hilarious. It's by some Charlotte fan who's just making fun of everybody who hates the pick. And I'm a little disappointed that I didn't make the cut. But yeah, like, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. Um, he doesn't. He doesn't need the ball to dominate. He can play off the ball, and he's a really smart player, and he's super unselfish. Grady is on the low end. Luke Kennard, which is still pretty damn good. I don't think he'll be Luke Kennard. I like Kaysen better than Black. I don't, and I love Kaysen Wallace, but I'm not sure I like him more than Anthony Black. Kaysen might replace Dort's starting spot eventually. I don't know how sustainable it is to start Lou Dort, because you have Jalen Williams, you have Shea, you have Josh Giddey, you have Chet, and ideally you're not going to play Chet at the 5, so you need a 5. So Kaysen and Lou off the bench, that's awfully small and weird. It's not really negativity, it's objective positivity. And this is not the only place you've seen negativity. You're just not looking. What are you talking about? Like, there were a lot of people who preferred Kobe Buffkin. Like, the reaction across the board was confusion about, I mean, if you had polled Raptor fans right before they made the pick, I think you would have seen at least 30% of people voting for him. I think the Grady Dick pick was a bit of a surprise, I think, for some people, because it wasn't expected that he would be available. It would just be like the Cam Whitmore thing, except even more drastic, right? But I think a lot of people had their heart set on Kobe Buffkin largely because they thought that that would be a signal that Fred VanVleet would leave. This is not negativity. This is just me saying that I think Jordan Hawkins is going to be a little bit better, but I'd be happy if I'm proven wrong. I don't know how many times I need to say this. I think I'm trying not to be rude when I say this, but I think that how do I put this without triggering people and getting, oddly offensive about this? I think when you're not, man, there's no nice way to say this. I think when you're not very smart, two things happen. Number one, you have a difficulty holding complex ideas. So everything's either black or white. You can't be gray. You can't see it as it's good if, it's not because it's not so good if. You can't do that. And number two, you're very unfamiliar, likely, with the concept of more information leads to better results or better better opinions. I was very firm on the fact that I did not do as much research on Grady Dick as I would have liked to. And I was also very firm at the draft and the night of, like 2 hours after the pick, or 2 hours after that live stream ended. But the more I saw of him, the more I liked him. And I don't really appreciate this little pigeonholing of like, oh, this is negative on Grady Dick, or you hate Grady Dick. I hate this. Like, it is my ultimate trigger, which is gaslighting. I've never hated Grady Dick. I don't dislike Grady Dick. I don't wish ill on Grady Dick. You're not gonna pigeonhole me because you're too stupid to understand an opinion that's complicated beyond your, do you hate it or do you love it? Do you know what I mean? Like, again, I'm trying not to be rude, but this is like the 800th time I'm hearing this today, and it's getting a little bit annoying. Hendricks is a solid 3-and-D player with a great motor. That's certainly an opinion that makes sense. He's got an elite skill already at 19 years old. It's hard-ass worker, high skills match. A natural talent grading is better than Hawkins. Who's to say, right? I mean, how many Jordan Hawkins games have you watched? How many Grady Dick games have you watched? Have you seen them in an NBA uniform? I mean, it's really difficult to say, right? I don't know. I think the thinking here was Grady's a bigger version. And, if that's the thinking, then great. Maybe it works out. But I'm just saying that a lot of people drafted bigger versions of Desmond Bane. And I'm not saying that Jordan Hawkins is necessarily going to be Desmond Bane, but I know what drives that dude. And I think he's going to be good. Regardless of how good Grady is, I'm confident Jordan's going to be good. Right? The more I watch of Grady, I'm also confident he's also going to be really good. I just keep feeling that there's someone better on the board. And it's impossible with the 13th overall pick, if you left 1, 2, 3, 4 players on the board who were better, for you to get an A grade for that draft pick. Right. Barely knew anybody in the draft. The highlights you showed us of George that one time, I really liked him. That's interesting because I was probably showing it to you on the this is why I don't like him, and you ended up liking him, which is funny. I'm high on George. In very minority, it seems. His shot creating is elite, needs improvements for sure, but he's a hard worker. Sure. I mean, good question. I think the difference really is team control, length of contract. I mean, granted, it's customary for high second round picks to be granted, a 3-year contract. And in the new CBA, I believe this is changing. I can't remember off the top of my head how it's changing, but it is different because previously, if you were over the cap, you had to use a part of your mid level exception. I believe that's what happened with the Raptors last year and Christian Coloco. So that's the big difference here is that you could sign a first round pick outright, but your second round pick, if you wanted to sign them to any reasonable deal, you had to use your mid level. So, you know, I guess team control would be a major leaning factor for me. They did implement the Gilbert Arenas rule, which allows the player to become a restricted free agent instead of a unrestricted free agent, which helps. But I just like the term and scale and the extra year of the first round pick. And I understand that, for teams that are super cap conscious, they want to maintain flexibility. The 32nd pick has a great deal more value than the 28th pick. My question is, if you hit it, then wouldn't you rather hit the extra year? But I understand the thinking that certain front offices have about not wanting late first round picks because it's guaranteed money. And it also depends on the draft. Last year's draft was so flat. And it seems like this year's draft has also been flat. And I wonder if this is just going to become a trend, as more people start playing basketball around the world. The drafts are just going to get deeper and deeper. And I wonder if with the third slot, right, with the third two-way slot, if it wouldn't be wise to have 3 rounds of the draft. You know what I mean? Get a few more guys into the league in a more meaningful way, because almost every year there's like 15, 20. There used to be like 2, 3, 4 guys who were like really appealing in the undrafted heap. Now there's always like 15, 20, 25 guys. Plus, I mean, my God, consider this year at least 10 guys who were really mocked in the late first, early second, mid second went back to school because of the NIL stuff, right? So those guys would have gone in the second round, which means some of the guys who went in the second round, like even Amani Bates, could have gone undrafted. I think we need a third round. That'd be great. So that we could, see some team trade 15 third round picks. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I think people might just be overreacting to Rob's live reaction to the pick, which I think is fair. I don't think it's fair. I'm not the one who said this is a mistake. This is a mistake. That was Leo. I don't speak for Basketball Zone. And in Leo's defense, he hadn't really watched Grady Dick play at all. So I don't understand why he felt it was a mistake other than looking at my big board. And again, I tell you, if I did the big board again, I'd probably have Grady 14th or 15th on my board. I'd probably replace Brandon Podziemski. So yeah, does that mean I would take him over my 5th ranked prospect? No, it doesn't. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad pick. It doesn't mean the pick can't work out. It's funny. I was thinking a lot about the development of a Malachi Flynn, a Delano Banton. Did the Raptors just forget how to draft, or did they forget how to develop? I don't think either. I think they've continued to develop. I think they've continued to draft reasonably well. At least I certainly understand the rationale with a Delano Banton. I definitely understand the rationale with Scotty and Coloco, and I certainly understand why they were intrigued by Precious Achua. The athletic profile is there. They were hard workers. So what is it? What's missing? A little bit of field touch. Okay, fine. Jump shooting, fine. But it's dawned on me that development tends to happen in places where people are happy, where people are in trusting environment, like where they have trust in the people around them. I don't know. It's a weird thing, right? Like we talk about so many things that can go wrong with a draft prospect. You look at the career or the prep career of an Imani Bates and just everything that went wrong for that dude, from the miscalculation to Eastern Michigan to his disastrous year in Memphis to being exposed. And it's just like, how did the guy who is being considered the next Kevin Durant fail so hard? And I mean, has he failed? Like, what if he's the 51st pick to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and what if next year he's a starting small forward because he's got some great untapped potential that he wasn't? I doubt it, right? You doubt it. I doubt it. You know, we've watched enough tape. We know that these things don't translate very well. But see, how are people so wrong about it, and were they wrong about it, right? And with someone like Imani Bates, is I really believe what happened, and a lot of people are quick to say, oh, he became too arrogant, or it was the police trouble, or it was his dad. You know, like with Patrick Baldwin, right? Patrick Baldwin is another example of another top five, high school guy who went really later than he should have. And had he stayed in college one more year, he probably would have gone second round firmly, right? So is it parents meddling? I think that's part of it. But I also think that in a lot of cases where parents have meddled, a lot of these kids have been trained from a very, very early age, right? So you have a guy like Imani Bates, super advanced for his age. You take someone like Patrick Baldwin Jr., probably also advanced for his age. Sometimes you're just too tall and too skilled to fail in grade 8, grade 9, grade 10. And just because you're ahead of people in grade 10, because you have a father who's devoted thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a year to develop your, handle. Let me give you an example. Like, what if I have a kid and at age 4, I teach them how to shoot. And every single day, I do drills with them and I make them like more athletic than every other kid, right? And then I send them to Brian, Handle Life, right? Scotty's trainer. And I get them to work with him every summer, right? By the time my kid's in grade 8, regardless of how naturally talented they are at basketball, they're going to be really good at basketball. I promise you, they'd be really good at basketball, unless like they get like really short genetics or something stupid like that, or they have like a really late growth spurt, or they're 5'8" or something. Like they're probably going to be really, really good because they're going to be further advanced. They're going to see the game better. I'm going to be doing film study with them. I'm going to be teaching them how to run a pick and roll. I mean, how many kids in grade 6 know how to properly run a pick and roll? I think there are NBA players who don't know how to properly run a pick and roll. So what if I give my kid all these advantages, all these advanced reads? I give them all these hours of prep. I give them their 10,000 hours so early. I do weightlifting with them. I do weight training with them. So they're stronger than the other kids. You ever went up against someone in youth who was just like way, way stronger than you? It's just physically impossible to stop them. So maybe in grade 8, my kid would be like the 25th ranked prospect in Canada or something crazy like that, right? But then you go up a year and then people start to grow, right? They start to grow and then the experience starts to catch up. And suddenly it's not 25th ranked, maybe it's 50th ranked now. And people are thinking, oh, he got lazy. He stopped working. He's not working as hard, but he's working just as hard. It's just some of his advantages are going away. His advantages are starting early. Other people are catching up, right? A lot of the stuff that he learned early, well, they're catching up now. They didn't know how to, run off a pin down screen and, catch and shoot off a movement, but now they know how to do that. They didn't understand how to play defense properly or read, how to go under a screen or over a screen properly or attack it, but now they do. And suddenly, as those defenders got bigger and stronger and longer, and all your competitors that you're being ranked against, they got a little bit bigger and more skilled, and they got more coaching, and now they're getting better coaching, and now they're going to prep schools, and they're getting access to the same trainers that you've had. Well, eventually the advantage is going to keep dissipating until one day you realize you're so far behind. You're not the 25th ranked, 100th ranked, 200th ranked. You're like the 800th ranked prospect in your country. And it can happen in 3-4 years. It can happen so fast. And the opposite can happen too. The guy who wins 800th gets the right trainer for a summer, hits a 4-inch growth spurt, really starts to take his body seriously, changes one element of his sleep and diet, gets the right situation with the right team, and suddenly he goes from like unranked to like the 6th best player in the country. Happens all the time. We are always grading these guys as little dots on a map, and we're trying to fill in all this other information about what came before and what came after, right? But you look at kids like Lonzo and LaMelo, and I'm firmly convinced that how hard they were pushed at such an early age to make the league and to be so good, that this overzealous attitude is what is leading to their tremendous amount of injuries now. You can say it's genetics, it's how they walk. I don't think so. I think it's just too much too soon. Their bodies took on a tremendous load. In a lot of ways, maybe this should be encouraging for someone like a Pascal Siakam, who doesn't have the same mileage of AAU basketball on his body. Um, but there's so much to be said for professional coaching from a strength and conditioning perspective. You look at someone like Victor Wembanyama, who's had this since he was in his early teens, and the way that they've given him the $1 million treatment, like he's treated like French royalty to some extent, right? They have him doing these like amazing things with his feet, with his shoes off, and he's crawling on the ground, and he's raising the flexibility and the strength of his feet, and he's doing all of these brilliant things to preserve his body and to extend the shelf life. And it's like, I wonder if some 7'2" kid in Sudan is going to be given the same treatment, the same coaching. He's not. Naturally, he's not. He's not going to get the same opportunities. And this is Masai Ujiri's entire pitch for investing in African infrastructure and investing in African sports, because he's like, shit, man, there's entire villages with people who are 6'7". Like, we can create economic opportunity through sport. And I fully understand that, right? So yeah, exactly. Cade Cunningham is a perfect example. When you watch Cade play when he was 16 or 15 years old, he played the game like a college kid. You could see him at 15. He was pretty big. I think I was first watched him when he was 15 or 16 years old. And you really felt it. You felt he was like a leader of men. He felt like more mature than the other kids. He was always started standing apart from them. And he just had a mature sensibility about him, right? He didn't seem like a kid. And I think that those advantages go away a little bit. And now people just want him to be this thing that he was at Montverde. And he's not. He's not. He's not going to be. And I don't think, I don't know if he's going to be a star or an all-star at some point. But the superstar talk needs to end. The building a franchise around talk needs to end. Jaden Ivey has a much better chance at it. Azar Thompson might have a better chance at it. I'm not kidding. Like, keep building this thing around Cade, because you started building it around Cade. It reminds me of what the Atlanta Hawks did with Trae Young, right? You paint yourself into a corner and you just say, this is our guy, this is our guy, this is our guy. And it's just like, man, there's a lot of evidence to say he's not the guy. Which brings me to my final point of the night, and then I will conclude this random impromptu 100-minute rant. Why are we so opposed to changing our minds about things? If you started out a Pascal lover, a supporter, an ardent supporter, the Pascal is going to be MVP camp people, or the Freddie is my MVP or Freddie All-Star stuff. If you had this perception and the information changed, why are you so opposed to changing? If you were of the Scottie Barnes is a bust, Scottie Barnes can't score, Scottie Barnes is 0-level scorer, Jalen Suggs is better, why is it that it's so uncomfortable to change your mind about it? I'll tell you why I think it's difficult for most people to change their mind. Number one is tribalism. We tend to become acquainted with people based on shared values and shared opinions. So, like, we're the Gary supporters, we're the Leaf supporters, we're the badminton supporter. I don't know what you support. You're the Trump supporter, Biden supporter, whatever. You're the Republican, you're the Democrat. But what if you're a Democrat, but the Republican has a really great idea? Can you admit it? What if you're a Republican, but the Democrat has a much better candidate? Can you switch? Why are we so uncomfortable doing that? Well, number one, because we're social creatures. And because I think we are social creatures, it becomes very dangerous to alienate ourselves from our social group or our peer groups, especially if our peer groups are not built on the values of constructive criticism, critical thought, and rather are tribal in their nature of we're the blue team, we're the red team, we're the purple team, we're the team that hates that guy, we're the team that loves that guy. And so if all of your friends love that guy and you are part of that group based on the fact that you love that guy, when you stop loving that guy, there's always a social fear of, will I be ostracized from that group? And that might sound drastic to you, but it's not that far-fetched. Groupthink is a really big thing. I think groupthink is a really big part of why a lot of teams passed on Cam Whitmore. Why did everyone else pass on him? Maybe I should pass on him too. You know, the Rockets were seriously considering Cam Whitmore at number 4, and they got him at 20. That's crazy. But so many teams probably thought about it, and then in those 5 minutes, they couldn't quite sell themselves on, well, do I want to be the idiot that picked him? It happens every year. There's always one guy, and you get to see who's the independent thinker and who's not. And I'm pretty comfortable in saying that if the Raptors had the 20th pick, they probably would have picked him. I'm pretty sure about that. He fits a lot of boxes for them. So I think that's one reason that we are firmly against changing our minds. The other thing I think is that because we believe that changing our mind makes us seem weaker in some way, you know? And I want to just say to you from the bottom of my heart that that's not true. I think changing your mind about things when new information presents itself is a sign of tremendous maturity and high intelligence. You should be willing to change your mind when information changes. I find too many people lock themselves into positions that they wouldn't adopt or would not take had they been able to be, if they had to do it again, they wouldn't do it. I think this is why people stay in relationships far too long. I think this is why people stay in career paths far too long. I think this is why people stay, at a company that they hate for far too long, because there is some need for consistency and stability in our lives. And I fully understand why you may not want to deviate from your career after you've put 8 years into building up that career. But if it genuinely doesn't make you happy, leave. Leave. And if you truly don't believe in Scottie, then you don't have to be tribal about it. If you saw enough last year to swing you off of it, then swing off. Don't worry, you can swing back on later. It's not, I mean, do it too many times and people would just think you're crazy, right? But, and I think this is a really good point, the social media echo chambers. And this is also a really good point, the sunk cost fallacy, right? Too many times we chase knives. There was this, there's a thought process, or there's a saying in finance: don't chase a falling knife. And I was guilty of this once. I believed in a company so much. I sunk $30,000 investing in this company, and this feeling was when the share price dipped, and the total market value of my investment became 22% of what it initially was. And this is the first time in my life that I had suffered a significant loss in the market. My first thought was, well, what a great opportunity to buy more shares. And, I did. I bought like 10,000 more shares. It was ridiculous. And it's very tempting. It's very tempting. And it really helped me understand a psychological sort of bias that I had there of, cheaper versus, these are such small things that we learn as children about price, cost, value, etc. And it's important that these figures and facts and thought processes get wired correctly in our brains, lest we, there was a great interview on the Pivot yesterday, and they said that every person who's broke doesn't have a money problem, they have an emotions problem. Firmly believe that to be the case. Firmly. Because it's not a math problem, it's an emotions problem. So anyways, I think that if at some point, if you're not super sold on the Grady Dick pick, and somewhere during the season you see more athleticism than you realized, or better defense than you realized, or an improvement trend where you're like, I didn't know he could improve that, and he's improving it. That's great. Or maybe you just feel differently about him. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, okay, you know what? I get it. It's great. You don't have to be the guy who hated the pick forever. And similarly, if you love the pick right now and you start to see that Jordan Hawkins is indeed a better player from rookie year to sophomore year, please don't be the idiot who goes over to every Pelicans board trying to prove that Grady Dick's a better player. Please don't be that person. Please don't be the Charlotte Hornets fan who consistently tries to troll Scoot Henderson and the Portland Trailblazers every time he has a bad game. And conversely, please don't be the Portland Trailblazers fan who goes up the Charlotte board every single time Scoot has a big game. It's not relevant anymore. The picks have been made. We can all agree to disagree. It doesn't really matter. All of us are wrong completely. I am so confident in Jaime Jaquez, and watch him be out of the league in 4 years. It can happen. It's truly unpredictable, but there are certain organizations that tend to do very well in the draft because they're great at developing. They have great culture. They have great teachers. They have great mentors. They have great mentorship programs. They have great facilities. These things all matter. So the next time you look at someone like Kwame Brown, or you look at someone like an Eddie Curry, or you look at someone like Zion Williamson, or a LaMelo Ball if he flames out, or a James Wiseman, or whoever, please know that it took two people. Well, it took at least two people to screw the pie, right? Or at least it took, yeah, it's not always just on the prospect. Sometimes it is almost entirely on the prospect. In the case of what Ja and what's happening with Ja, it's almost entirely on him, right? Big supporter of Ja Morant, of course. I want to say that every time I bring up Ja Morant because I want people to know that I really support him, regardless of how this turns out for him or how his career turns out. But I think that it's important to be able to change your mind when information changes. I think it's, as I said, it's a sign of intelligence and evolved critical thinking. So, similarly, if you're a big Pensar basketball supporter and, my takes stop making sense and I just, become toxic and ridiculous and whatever, you don't need to like stick around through it. Do you know what I mean? You haven't painted yourself into anything. There's always like fluidity of ideas. And I've always believed that, I look back at my life sometimes and I wonder how many. I was talking to my girlfriend today and we had a really deep discussion about, you know, curing the generation, right? Some of us did not come into this world on the right path or the right foot. Some of us were not given the longest stick. And that is not a pun about dicks. Please understand that. Some of us were just given, I don't want to say like a bad hand, but a tough hand. And it's up to us to, do something with it. It's up to us to create a better pathway for the next generation, I think, to make sure that our kids don't have to struggle the way we did. I'll tell you the earliest memory that I had of struggling was in grade 6, and I wanted piano lessons. I really wanted piano lessons. Like I was obsessed with piano, and I just really liked this girl who played piano. And I asked my mom, it's like, can I get piano lessons? And she's like, sure. She didn't know how much they cost. And then I told her that they cost $30 an hour. My mom was making like $8 an hour or $9 an hour. $10 an hour. It was something ridiculously low. She's working 2 jobs. And she's like, I can't work 3 hours for you 1 hour of piano. Just can't do it. You want to do it? Get a job one day. And I took that as an invitation to go get a job right away. And so I get the job. And, after I worked $5 an hour cleaning convenience stores and, sitting in freezer rooms and stocking toilet paper, I didn't want to spend 6 hours of my salary for 1 hour of piano lessons. So I would just sit outside and I would just dream. I would try to listen. I would try to enjoy it, but I wouldn't go in. I wouldn't pay for it. And then I made myself like a promise when I was 12, 13 years old, that I was 12, I was in grade 6, that when I have a kid, they're never gonna they're never going to go through that. Like, I'm going to be able to afford piano lessons for my kids. And that's dictated like a ton of my decisions in my life. It's dictated why I started businesses. It's dictated why I didn't go out as much, why I worked so hard. Because one day I wanted to be able to afford piano lessons for my kids. So, we were talking about, how tremendous a leap it takes and how, how many obstacles you have to overcome to cure generational trauma in one generation. It usually takes a lot of generations because there's a lot of fallouts of generational trauma. You get poor concentration if you have trauma in your childhood, you get poor self-esteem. There's all these things that sort of set you back from other people. You look at all the people around you and you look at you and you're like, shit, they got 50,000 things that I don't have. How am I supposed to make up the gap in one lifetime? Maybe I make up 10,000 and my kids will make up 10,000. And maybe in 5 generations, my grandkids will be on par with their grandkids. I wanted to do it in one lifetime. And so I was just like, I charted out on this like crazy course, and I just really relentlessly wanted to work really hard and learn everything that I could and just become the best person that I could. So I wouldn't pass on some of, the stuff that I had picked up. And one of the things that I always come back to in terms of what has made me modestly successful in my life, I can pivot. I can change direction. I think I change direction about as well as anyone I've ever met. I may not speak as well as other people. I may not know as much as other people. I may not be as smart as other people, tall as other people, good looking as other people, rich as other. I don't give a shit. But I will pivot so hard. Like when I get new information, I switch, I change, I adapt, I learn. And I think adaptability is a spice of life. I think you should get it in your life. So if you need to adapt on something, adapt. If you need to get rid of that friendship of yours that's been kind of soaking up your blood for like a few years, adapt. It's not disloyal. It's not loyal, because honestly, at the end of the day, your loyalty is to your family to some extent. Not always. Sometimes we have terrible family, but it's to you. It's to you. It's to build the best version of you, I think. And I don't think that's selfish. I really don't. So if you picked the guitar, the lesson would have been cheaper. That's true, but I wasn't interested in guitar. As a kid of Chinese immigrants, I support my kids if they love piano, sports, whatever, but I will never force them to do what is pressed onto me. That's great. Um, it's a fine line. Sometimes you push so hard that you shut someone down, but sometimes you don't push at all and you also shut someone down. I think it's just important for kids. I mean, I'm saying this as a non-parent, so I don't know if you have kids or who has kids out there, but this is some unsolicited parenting advice from a non-parent, which I know parents just love to hear unsolicited parenting advice from non-parents, but it's just something that I want to implement in my parenting strategy when I grow up. And it's something that I've learned a lot from Scotty's mom, something that I've learned from just people that I've admired a lot, is you let kids make their own mistakes and you let them find their own path. But I think to some extent, you want to always make sure that that they know that you got their back. Like, come whatever, like whatever they did, whatever they don't want to do, whatever decision, that you can always have a conversation about it. You're not always going to agree with it. You're not always going to be lenient about it. You might ground them. There's going to be consequences. Fine. But it's never too serious that you can't talk about it. And I think that that's really important, because I think a lot of kids hide things from their parents, not because they're bad kids, but because they're ashamed, because so much shame has been bred into them. And so I think that it's really important. Like, if there was one emotion that I would never want my child to experience, it would be shame. I'm gonna never let them experience shame. You know what I mean? Like, I can let them experience failure, no problem. I can let them experience, love, heartbreak, whatever, but no shame. Don't let them experience shame, because shame creates more shame. Shame creates shaming. Shame creates fear. Shame, and honestly, fear is another one. I would try to instill a confidence that they would not feel fearful of things. So yeah. Anyways, enough life talk. It is 4:40 in the morning. I do have some editing assignments to get to, but I wanted to make this video. I thought that I had a point. I don't know if I made the point, but I hope that this was rich and insightful and that someone's going to get a lot out of this. I hope that, I gotta tell you, I've been listening to some podcasters who are just really good at podcasting, people that I admire and people that have this very smooth, even flow. They don't kiss their lips. They don't say, there's just like a smooth stream of thought. And sometimes I hear myself and I don't hear that. And I understand that I'm very new at this. I'm trying to get better. But let me know in the comments if it's getting a little bit better. I know sometimes I have good episodes and I sometimes have bad episodes. But yeah, just as I right there. Anyway, if you are on your way in, on your way out, please hit like. I would really appreciate it. Helps the algorithm, helps more people see this when they wake up. Although, I mean, I don't know who's watching a 1 hour 55-minute episode on their way to work. So this video is probably going to tank. No pun intended. But anyways. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. What if my kid doesn't want to play ball? Well, I don't know. I haven't considered that option too many times, but my girlfriend's talked to me about it a couple times. She's like, what if they don't want to play basketball? And I was just like, if she only knew all the little subconscious tricks that I'm going to play to make sure that kid plays basketball. Like, first of all, they're going to see me watching basketball all the time. Then they're going to see me playing basketball. Then they're going to see me like talking about basketball. And I'm probably going to put a basketball in their crib. I'm probably going to give them like basketball shoes. I don't know. Like, there will be a lot of subconscious pushing. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Please don't. Like, I'm just kidding. I think that if you can show your kids a genuine expression of passion for something, that they will at least try it. And if they try it and they hate it, then you just move on. And basketball is not their path. And maybe guitar is their path, or rugby is their path, or maybe they can do a sport that I was really bad at, like soccer. Like, I was good at tennis and I was good at basketball. Those are my two sports. I was okay at rugby too, but those are my three sports. I'll say three sports. I sucked at baseball, and I cannot skate, so I don't know how to play hockey. And what if my kid's a professional hockey player or an amateur hockey player? I don't know. I hope they learn how to skate, though. I'll tell you that. What if my son is an artistic type? Ha ha ha. I'm an artistic type. So the apple does not fall far from the tree. Oh, thank you so much, man. I always appreciate it. Yeah, it's funny. Like, you're not the first person to say that wife and husband listen to it. It's always crazy to me. Someone sent me a picture or a video of Instagram. They recorded themselves watching this live, and it was in, where was it? Bermuda? Was it in Bermuda or Vancouver? I can't remember. And it was like 5 people. It was 5 people. It was like 2 teenage sons, a teenage daughter, and like parents. And they're all watching it. And they said, we just wanted to let you see like how we watch you. And they put me on TV, and I'm like, oh my God, like that's so crazy to me. Like, I mean, you see these numbers, and sometimes it says 300, but like sometimes you realize that someone's actually watching you in a group of like 10, 15 people, and it's just crazy. I mean, this has grown way bigger, way faster than I ever thought it would. So thank you so much, and I hope that I'll get better at this. Thank you. Anyways, have a good night, guys, or good morning. Obviously, it's 5 a.m., so good morning, almost 5 a.m. Good morning, and hope you have a great day. Bye.